Arweinydd Grŵp UKIP.
Leader of the UKIP Group, Neil Hamilton.
Can I welcome the First Minister back from his trip to Norway, and perhaps he could tell us what conclusions he arrived at as a result of that. Is he aware that 70% of the Norwegian people are still adamantly opposed to membership of the EU? And as regards membership of the EEA, will he confirm that Norway is a member of the Schengen Agreement, and so unfettered access to the EEA, to the single market, which the First Minister is always advocating, is going to require also unfettered access to the UK for unlimited numbers of EU immigrants?
Is the answer to that, because people in Norway, he's right to point out that they do not support EU membership, but they very much strongly support EEA membership and freedom of movement. But there is a difference, and I believe this is an issue that is a profitable route for us to pursue in the UK. Freedom of movement in Norway involves freedom of movement to work. It's not an unlimited system of freedom of movement. There are some rules surrounding then how people can look for work if they lose a job, but it's not an unfettered right of freedom of movement. All they do actually is follow the European rules to the letter, which the UK didn't. The UK was more liberal in its approach and went beyond what the rules required. Now, if that is what's required in order to access the single market, I think that is something that people would find perfectly reasonable. Well,
we discovered the answer to that question, the result of the referendum itself, because the referendum was overwhelmingly motivated, everybody seems to agree this, by fears about unfettered migration. And as regards all the evidence shows that that was the clinching factor in the result. And Plaid Cymru, of course, are not only in favour of full membership of the single market, but they're also in favour of full membership of the customs union, which will prevent us from entering into deals with third-party countries as well. So at least the Labour Party hasn't gone that far in its adherence to EU membership. But the reality is, isn't it, First Minister, that 508 million people currently have a right of entry, being EU citizens, to this country, to come here to live and to work. And if we were members of the EEA, then that would be, to all intents and purposes, the same as it is now.
No, because if you interpret the rules strictly, that's what you get. You get a freedom of movement to work, and I believe that people would accept that. I think if people believe that somebody was coming to a job that they have, that would be a reasonable position to adopt. I mean, the other thing that we have to remember is that the UK will have an open border with the EU. It will have an open border in Ireland, which will not be in any way policed and not be in any way monitored. Now, whenever this is mentioned in discussions we have with UK ministers, we see the equivalent of an ostrich plunging its head into the sand. They keep on saying it'll be fine. But the reality is, given the fact there will be an open border with the EU, given the fact the UK government will then want to monitor whether somebody has the right to work in the UK, how does an individual prove that right? Passports are optional, driving licences are optional, you end up with a compulsory ID card system. There's no other way of doing it. And again, this is something that hasn't been thought through properly, amongst many, many questions that are yet to be answered by the UK government.
Well, in the nicest possible way, I'd like to encourage the First Minister to spend more time abroad and going to other countries where he can learn something about how the world operates outside the EU. And in particular, I'd like to encourage him to go to South Korea, because South Korea, not just because it's about as far away, or via Los Angeles, possibly, but because South Korea has actually managed to negotiate a free trade agreement with the EU, so that it's not part of the single market, but it has all the trade benefits of membership of the single market without any of the encumbrances of the freedom of movement of people. And as this has been lauded by the Trade Commissioner of the EU, Cecilia Malmström, in these terms, she says the evidence of the agreement with Korea should help convince the unconvinced that Europe benefits greatly from more free trade areas. It spurs European growth and safeguards and creates jobs. Now, I'm sure that the First Minister and I are absolutely in agreement on that point, and therefore it would be very helpful, I think, for the UK generally if he were to add his considerable weight to the argument for more free trade agreements with the rest of the world, which is something we can negotiate only outside the customs union and outside the EU.
Well, I don't know if he means political or physical weight. I'll try and be optimistic in terms of what he means. But I mean, The reality is this, that free trade agreements take many, many years to negotiate. The UK will not have free trade agreements within 2 years. Whenever I've spoken to officials who've been involved in such discussions, they find it laughable that people even say that. It takes only 2 years almost to set the framework for the discussions. Now, the concern that I have is that in 2 years the UK will fall off the edge of the cliff and have a free trade agreement with nobody, because there'll be no transitional arrangements, and so transitional arrangements will be absolutely crucial beyond March 2019, otherwise there'll be nothing. He mentions Korea. What I don't want is for the UK to become a kind of European North Korea that's actually cut off from the rest of the world with any kind of trading arrangements with anybody. That surely is in nobody's interest. But there has to be a dose of realism here. It's been said, well, you know, the world will fall at the UK's feet. I don't believe that at all. The UK is small compared to the other trading blocs, and we have to be realistic and have to enter into negotiations with an open mind. We also have to understand that as far as market access is concerned, there is a quid pro quo. We cannot demand from the European Union everything we want and expect to get it. That's not going to happen. It's not going to happen that way. For me, there is a choice. Either you say we are going to limit immigration, which is impossible because of the open border, or you say we're going to have access to the single market. To me, access to the single market is absolutely the most important issue for us in Wales, and therefore anything else can be compromised on. And I believe that if we say to the people of Wales there is a freedom of movement to work, then that is something that most people would accept as perfectly sensible.
Leanne.